Howdy, howdy, howdy. We are in topic number 3 in the second unit within our Science 8 curriculum. And topic 3 is all about cell structure and function. Okay, so let's get through it. This slide here I included, there's a couple really good videos here. We won't have time to watch it in class, but while you're studying, it's in your best interest to watch either or both of these videos. It's going to help be really a supplementary lesson to what you've gained in class. It's going to help further your understanding of what we covered. Essential questions. So again, remember, essential questions, we should be able to answer these by the time we're done this topic. Okay, so we're going to be able to answer, what is a cell? We're going to be able to answer, what are the structures inside a cell? These are also called organelles. And what are unicellular and multicellular organisms? Okay, moving on. Key vocabulary, right here, all there. These are really, really important when you're figuring out what to study and how to study. These are terms you need to focus on, okay? Organelles, there's a whole bunch of different ones on here, okay? Ones I recommend you spend more time on, your cell membrane, your mitochondria, okay, your nucleus, your cytoplasm, your chloroplast, okay, and your cell wall. For now, these are the most important ones we need to have for grade 8. When you guys progress through your science career, grade 9, grade 10, etc., okay, you're going to need to know all of these for sure, okay? But for this year, those 6 that I just bolded, those are the most important ones that we want to have a good understanding of. Moving on. Cells, so what the heck are they? Okay, well, we can see in this little GIF here right now, okay, it's zoomed in, we're microscopic, okay, and as we zoom out, we can see that these are actually skin cells that make up the skin organ on this individual, and unfortunately for him, he's looking a little lonely, okay. So cells, definition, and again, we have those follow along notes, so if you were absent the day we did these in class, you should probably have your follow along notes out with you right now. Anything that's highlighted green, that's what you're going to write in on your notes here. Okay, so definition. What's a cell? Well, it's the smallest building block of life that can live on its own. It can survive on its own. Okay, now you might be thinking, well, wouldn't one of my cells just be an organism? Because if it can live on its own, it's got to be an organism. Well, if you remember back to topic 1, the definition of organism is that not only is it living on its own, but it's living independently. So if we took just one of these little cells, one of these little skin cells, took it off with like a needle or something, that skin cell wouldn't survive very long and definitely wouldn't be functioning independently on its own. So that's why we wouldn't call an individual cell an organism. It is alive, but we wouldn't call it an organism. Okay, next, all organisms are made up of cells. So that's something all life has in common, all life that we've discovered so far at least. All life has in common that we all have cells, whether it's a plant, whether it's a human, whether it's a fungus of some kind, they're made up of cells, okay? And as we saw in topic 1, cells combine together, kind of like Lego bricks combining together to build like a car or something. Cells combine together to form tissue. In the example we have right here, these skin cells are forming together to form skin tissue. And that the multiple types of skin tissues form together to make the actual skin. And believe it or not, skin is an organ. Just like your heart, just like your brain, skin is an organ. Moving on. An organism can be a single cell itself. So an organism can be made of just one cell. And we would call that unicellular. To remember that, think of a unicycle. How many wheels does a unicycle have? It has 1. So uni means 1, unicellular, okay? Or an organism can be made up of numerous cells, and we would call that multicellular, and that makes sense, right? Multi means more than 1, multicellular. Awesome. Moving on. So talking about unicellular organisms a little bit, okay? So here we have down here some kind of a unicellular organism, okay? And this is microscopic. It's been zoomed in many times so we can actually see this little guy, okay? And he is unicellular because he only has 1 cell that makes up its entire body, okay? The single cell that makes up this type of organism is responsible for accomplishing the 5 basic life functions. So if you remember back to topic 1, for something to be classified as alive, it has to be able to meet the 5 basic life functions. So remember, that is, it needs to be able to grow, It needs to be able to take in energy of some kind. It needs to be able to produce waste. It needs to be able to reproduce, and it needs to be able to respond to its environment. Okay, so this one little cell, we can see how it's responding to its environment, right? It might be searching for food here. It might be afraid of those little things floating around there. I'm not really sure, but it's changing direction. It's moving around on its own in response to its environment. Okay, it takes in energy. It absorbs other little organisms and other nutrients to grow, to have energy. Okay, it does produce waste. Things will come out of it. Okay, and it definitely has to reproduce. If it didn't reproduce, its species would go extinct. Okay, and this one little cell, that one little cell is responsible for all of those jobs. That's a lot of jobs for one little cell. So as a result, unicellular organisms are more simple than multicellular. So a unicellular organism will never be as complex as, say, a human being. A human being is complex. We can do a lot of things. We are highly intelligent because we're made up of trillions of cells and many, many, many different types of cells that are more specialized. So if you think of like a handyman that's really good at a lot of things, like let's say he's a good carpenter, he's a good welder, he's good at automotives, right? He's kind of a jack of all trades, but he's a master of none because he's not specialized to be a fantastic welder. He's not specialized to be a fantastic carpenter. He's good at those things, but not great. Whereas, say, a brain cell in your brain, that thing is specialized. Like it is made, its structure is designed to be really good at its job, its function, which is helping you think, helping you learn, helping you store memory. So specialized cells, they're really good at one thing, whereas a unicellular organism, they have to be okay at a lot of things, at meeting the 5 basic life functions. Moving on to multicellular organisms. So multicellular organisms, it's made up of at least 2 cells or more. Yourself sitting right there in that chair, you are made up of trillions of cells, trillions with a T, trillions of cells and numerous different types of cells, okay? And we call this cell differentiation, okay? Fancy word, differentiation. And essentially like what that means is what I was saying before, is that cells are specialized. They are designed for one job in mind, okay? So if we look at, here is the skin organ, okay? And we can see that the skin is made up of a number of different types of tissue, right? Here, you don't need to remember this either, by the way. Like if you take anatomy in college, then you can start to learn this. But for now, you don't need to remember this stuff. This is just an example of how one single organ is made up of a bunch of different types of tissues, which of course is made up of a bunch of different types of cells. So we can see we have this external layer called a cornified layer, I guess. We have a clear layer, granular layer, spinous layer, and then a basal layer, okay? And we can see how these different layers are made up of different types of cells. So the basal layer, all these cells are pretty much the same. The spinous layer, same thing, right? The shape's a little bit different, but for the most part, same type of cell. Same thing with that layer, same thing with that layer, and same thing with that layer, okay? Why is the structure of these cells different? Well, they have different roles. They have different jobs. This basal layer, I'm assuming, probably really thin cells that is able to absorb water really well, able to absorb nutrients from your blood really, really well. But because it's really thin cells, it makes sense that it's inside your body. If this basal layer was on the outside, your body might be more susceptible to pathogens and disease and bacteria, right? If you look at this cornified layer, these look like armor. It looks like armor plating like you might see like on a lizard kind of thing, right? And that makes sense. That function, the function of this layer would be to protect the insides of the organism's body. So structure follows function. Whatever the function, whatever the job is of a particular type of cell, that cell structure needs to look like that. Think of like, say, I don't know, a knife. What's the function of a knife? The function of a knife is to cut, right? So the structure of the knife has to be sharp, okay? So the cell differentiation allows cells to take on different functions to accomplish these different jobs. Remember, function means jobs. Their structures are designed differently too. Okay, awesome. So again, unicellular versus multicellular, they have a lot of things in common, right? They're both made up of cells, but the main difference is that multicellular is 2 or more, okay? Something else to keep in mind about unicellular, and you don't need to know this for grade 8, but I think it's kind of cool. A lot of unicellular organisms, they actually don't have a nucleus. And what the heck is a nucleus? We'll talk more about that later, okay? If you want to learn more about unicellular and multicellular organisms, boom, there's a video for you. And this video will help lock down what we learned in these last 2 slides, okay? It'll teach you a few more things that you don't need to know for this year, but heck, no knowledge is bad knowledge. Moving on. Cell structure. So what the heck is a cell? Like, what is a cell made up of? And how is their structure designed? So we can see in this little GIF here, this is a representation of a cell. I mean, this is computer graphics, right? This isn't a real cell. This is a representation so we can learn. But it's a really good representation of what a cell can look like. Cells can look really different than this too. But this is just one representation of what a cell looks like. And we can see that they're kind of like a blob, kind of like a water balloon almost, okay? And this water balloon is made up of a membrane, okay? So like think of, again, water balloon. That's like the rubber holding in the water. That's what your cell membrane does. And inside that cell membrane is a fluid. It's mostly water, but we don't call it water, we call it cytoplasm. And that cytoplasm is really important because it allows the cell to have a structure, right? It's like a blown up water balloon. If you didn't have that water inside it, it's just like a floppy chunk of rubber, right? A cell can't function very well if it isn't inflated full of the cytoplasm. And the other organelles, the other parts that make up a cell, they depend on the cell having that cytoplasm, having a good shape. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so we know that the structure of cells, they are tiny, 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 tiny. And they are 10 to 15 micrometers. And if you're wondering what's a micrometer? I mean, I know what a centimeter is. Centimeter is 1/100th of a meter, right? That's easy to understand. A micrometer is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. So picture a meter in your head and now divide it 1,000,000 times. That's how tiny a cell is, okay? In cells, they are the parts that make up an organism. I'm going to zoom back to, where was it? Sorry, this one. Zoom back to this one. So we can see that this person, all of his tissues are made up of cells, right? And the focus right now are skin cells for him. Every single part of his body is made up of cells. And these cells combine together, kind of like Lego pieces, to build an organism, okay? Now the cells themselves, they are made up of parts as well. And just like a human body has organs, cells have organelles. And actually what that actually means is a little L, like that E-L-L-E-S, that means little. So it's like little organ, right? It's a little organ that makes up a cell, okay? So here's your definition right there. I'm not going to bother reading to you because I just explained what it is. They're like little organs. They're the parts that make up a cell, okay? Now there are a ton of different types of organelles. We're going to focus on about 10, and of those 10, half of those are important that we need to know the function and structure of, okay? So on page 121 in your guys' textbooks, it does talk about many of these, but not all of them. So we're going to have to do a little bit of research on Google as well, but thankfully there's a lot of really great resources we can use to research these. Okay, I'm going to go through some of the most important ones, and again, I'm going to highlight them just so we know which ones we should really be focusing on. So cell membrane, as I said earlier, the cell membrane is kind of like the skin of your cell, okay? It's, depending if it's a plant or an animal, but it's kind of like the rubber on a water balloon, right? It can change shape, but it's still a solid, okay? And it is permeable. Permeable means it allows things to pass through it or pass out of it. So when a cell needs water, water can pass through this permeable cell membrane. When it has too much water inside of it, the water can pass out of it because it's permeable, okay? I'm going to skip skeletal wall for just a second. Cytoplasm, like I said earlier, it's made up largely of water, and it's the water that's inside the cell, Okay, it's important because it gives the cell shape. It allows the cell structure to be what it needs to be. So that all these other organelles, all these other parts, are able to do their jobs, do their function. The nucleus. This is that big guy right here in the middle. Okay, and you might be thinking, well, he looks kind of important. Well, he is. Inside the nucleus is something called DNA. And I'm sure you've heard of that. It's in movies, it's in books, DNA. And DNA is, long story short, blueprints. It's the blueprints that tells your cell what its job is. So if this is a skin cell, the DNA is saying like, hey, it's your job to be a skin cell. You're gonna grow in a specific type of way because you've got this specific type of job. If this is supposed to be a muscle cell or a brain cell or a bone cell, the DNA is what makes that cell build itself the way it's supposed to be built. Okay. Now we each have our own DNA that's unique to us, kind of like our fingerprints. Okay. And that, again, that DNA tells our cells how to grow. And additionally, why you are unique, that's thanks to your DNA, right? You might have blue eyes, thanks to your DNA. You might have darker skin. You might be 5'11". You might have a hitchhiker's thumb. Again, that's thanks to your DNA. And that DNA is stored in every single nucleus of your cells. Next, mitochondria. Now, there's a lot of memes on the internet about mitochondria because biology teachers are always talking about them. And those memes are always going to say that mitochondria, this little guy here, looks kind of like a bean, right? It has like a little wave on the inside. The mitochondria is, quote unquote, the powerhouse of the cell. These guys generate something called ATP. You don't need to know that. But they generate energy. ATP is really the form of energy. So we are able to grow, we are able to move, we are able to function thanks to energy. And energy is created in mitochondria inside your cells. Without mitochondria, we wouldn't have any energy and we wouldn't be able to function. We wouldn't survive. Okay? Now, back to cell wall. Cell wall, we actually don't see a cell wall here because this is a cell of an animal. Okay? If we were looking at the cell of a plant, we would see a cell wall. And a cell wall is, exactly what it says. It's a wall. It's more rigid. It's kind of like a shield. And it's important for plants to have a cell wall because, one, they can't move the same way animals can. So they can't respond to the environment as quickly and as more acutely as an animal can. So they need to have a little bit more defense, and that's what a cell wall provides. It also provides structure. So think of like a flower growing, right? It doesn't have muscles to keep itself standing upright. Cell walls provide that structure so that they're rigid, they can stay standing without just like collapsing into a pile of goo. So that's what a cell wall is. Animals don't have it. We don't have cell walls on our cells, but plants do. Same thing with a chloroplast, okay? That's only found in plant cells. And the reason for that is because chloroplasts take in sunlight. Photosynthesis happens in plant cells thanks to chloroplasts because that's the organelle responsible for taking in that sunlight and converting it into energy. Animals don't have these because we absorb our energy in different ways. Human beings, for example, we have to eat our energy. We can't absorb sunlight because we do not have chloroplasts. I really wish sometimes that we did though, because it's like, hey, I'm hungry. You go out on a sunny day and you just get fed. That'd be pretty cool. Moving on. So the structure and function of cells. Okay, this is an assignment we're going to do in class, in groups. You guys are going to be given, or rather assigned, an organelle, and you guys have to, your groups will be here, okay? And you guys will need to figure out what's the structure. What does a lysosome look like? What's it designed like, okay? What's its function, okay? What's the job of a lysosome? And then lastly, you have to find a picture, copy and paste it. Okay, so pretty easy. Just 3 things you gotta quickly look at. I would actually start with the picture first. That's gonna help you see what the structure looks like. And then research what the function looks like. You might have to Google a couple different things to make sense. Some of the definitions are pretty tough to understand. I would even type in lysosome simple definition so that they can break it down in an easier way to understand. Okay, and then we'll present those to the class. Easy peasy, awesome, I'm looking forward to those. The next assignment you guys are gonna do is a Tinder profile. Okay, I don't know if you guys remember Tinder or not, but it was a dating app that was, all the rave about 5 or 6 or, a million years ago kind of thing. But anyway, on a Tinder profile, a person would put a picture of themselves, they would write a bio, and they would hope to get, a date or whatever out of it. So we're going to pretend one of the organelles are doing that. So let's just say like, hey, I think the nucleus is really cool. Okay, you're going to personify the nucleus. You're going to draw a nucleus, but you'll turn them into a person and a person who's trying to date. So maybe you draw like a nucleus and then put a body on him with like some like muscles. Maybe he's working out or something, right? You're going to put some humor into it because that's fun. You'll also write a bio. So the bio is not only going to be funny, but it's also going to reflect the function. So maybe a nucleus would be like, quote unquote, I'm a high intellectual person. If you want to know how to get something done, ask me because I have all the blueprints, right? So the bio is going to reflect the function of the nucleus. You might even want to talk about the structure as well. Like if you're doing a mitochondria, the bio might say like, hey, if you like energy, you'd love me because I'm the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, here's how you're being graded. Okay, and actually I forgot to change this. Pardon me, the bio, that's going to be double the amount of marks because that's really important. So most of the marks are going to be on the bio. Okay, 4 marks for creativity and humor, 4 marks for neatness, and 4 marks for creating 2 different pics of the organelle. We'll talk more about this in class as well. If you're wondering where to find this, like if you missed that class, of course, it's all going to be on Classroom. You can print it off. I'll have one for you if you don't have a printer. Heck, if you're gone for a bunch of days and you don't have a printer, you can just grab a piece of paper and draw it out as best you can, right? That's all good as well. Okay, moving on. A couple pictures here. So looking at these 2 pictures, one of these is a microscopic image of plant cells, and the other is a microscopic image of animal cells. Okay, ask yourself which one you think is which. Pretty clearly, I mean, we would guess this one is the plant cells, and you would be correct. Not only does the color, it's green, the color shows that this is probably a plant, but look at the structure of these cells. We can see how these are really rectangular in shape, okay? And we can see how the edges of these cells are really rigid looking. They're really thick looking. That's that cell wall we were talking about before, okay? And those cell walls allow these cells to maintain its shape. And that is crucial for a plant because if they didn't have that cell wall and if those cells weren't maintaining their shape, the plant would just collapse. It would just turn into a pile of mush. Whereas we can see in the animal cells that these cells kind of change shape. They're kind of like fleshy balls, right? They're kind of like water balloons. And they're kind of pushing around each other, morphing, changing shape. And animals are able to do that because we have muscles and bones. Those types of cells allow us to have structure without just collapsing on the floor in a big pile of mush. Think of an octopus though. An octopus doesn't have bones, but it does have a lot of muscle. Okay, I mean, if I took an octopus out of water and dropped it on the floor, yeah, that's a pile of mush. But it's still able to move around thanks to its muscles. Okay. Moving on, now we're going to really start comparing plant and animal cells. So we know that they're both alive, okay? And we know that they're both cells, so they have that in common. But there are differences. There are similarities as well. So take a second, take 10 seconds, pause this, and take a look first for similarities. And then after that, look for differences. So go ahead and pause it right now. Take a look. Very good. Thanks for pausing it. I hope you did. Okay, so some similarities. I mean, yes, they're both cells. Check that off. Okay. Yes, look at that. There's a nucleus right here. And a nucleus isn't shaped like this. Like they've cut into it just to show us what the inside looks like. Okay. It would be more of like a sphere. But yes, both plant and animal cells have nucleus. Awesome. I can see some mitochondria here. Awesome. Good. Okay. Now, it's kind of hard to tell from these, sorry, that's the bell going off. Sorry. It's kind of hard to tell from these diagrams, but there is cytoplasm, that mostly water inside both. That's awesome. So there's lots of similarities between these two, okay? But there are also differences. Look at the cell membrane here. We can see how it's kind of squishy, kind of like a water balloon looking. But look at the plant cell. It's got structure. It's got shape. And that's thanks to the cell wall. Okay, so we can see how this is like a solid, rigid, definite shape, whereas the animal cell is more like a water balloon. We can also see this big, massive blue thing. And that's called a vacuole. Okay, and as I'm sure we studied earlier, or when you guys get to that organelle working document, if your job is to study the vacuoles, you'll find that the vacuole is basically like a big storage tank. It keeps more water in there, which is important for plant cells, but it also keeps some nutrients, some proteins in there that could and will be used later. Okay, so plant cells have one massive vacuole, whereas a lot of animal cells have vacuoles, but they're tiny and they're small and they're numerous. They'll have 3 or 4 rather than one big massive one. Okay, there are more differences and there are more similarities, but for now, those are the main differences. And I mean, here's a more in detail one. Do I expect you to remember all this? Heck no, absolutely not. You don't need to know that for grade 8. No. Later down the road you will, okay? But for now, no, not necessary. I just wanted to show you a little bit more in detail here. And I mean, if you take a quick look at it, we can see more similarities. Like here's a Golgi apparatus, pink looking guy. He sends proteins around, okay? We've got endoplasmic reticulums on both. Okay, again, moving. Hey, sorry about that, guys. I was interrupted there just by a student. All good. Anyway, these are more detailed for sure, and we can see more differences. We can see more similarities between these two cells on here. Don't feel overwhelmed. Don't think you have to memorize every single little thing on here. You don't. Just a specific number of those organelles. Okay. Here's a really good video that you can watch if you want while you're studying, and that goes into detail the differences between the plant and animal cells. Here's a Venn diagram, and this one is on your follow along notes. The ones that are circled in the yellow circles are the ones you got to fill in. Okay, so we can see that animal cells and plant cells have in common, they both have mitochondria. Mitochondrion is the singular version of it. Mitochondria is plural. They both have a Golgi apparatus. They both have a rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. They both have a nucleus. They both have cytoplasm, and they both have ribosomes. Okay, plants, on the other hand, they are the only cells that have cell walls, chloroplasts, and they have a large vacuole. That was this big thing right here. Okay, the cell walls on the outside here. Okay, you made these little purple fellas; those are your chloroplasts. Sorry, pardon me, the green guy here. Actually, in this diagram, I'm not sure. Let's have a look here. Chloroplast. Let's have a look. Where is a chloroplast? Right there, the green guy. And that would make sense, right? Chloroplast should be green. Okay. Awesome. Don't worry about flagella. Okay, that's all good. But these 3 things right here, those are the 3 main differences. Cell wall, a large vacuole, and a chloroplast, only found in a plant. Everything else, similar. Okay. Another really good resource you can choose to use while you're studying. You don't have to, but it shows a pretty cool comparison between plants and animal cells as well. And here's one more diagram, just to be thorough. Okay, again, these are things they have in common. Okay, these are things that plant cells only have. They have the large vacuole, they've got a cell wall, and they've got chloroplasts. Okay, and again, the main differences to remember, like I just said, chloroplasts, vacuole, and the cell wall. Those are the main differences. Looks like a pretty good test question to me. Moving on, cell function. Okay, so cells, they need to carry out certain activities or functions, jobs, to keep the cell alive. And then if the cells are alive, yeah, the organism is going to be alive as well. If cells can't survive, then the organism has to die as well. Think of the citizens that make up a country, right? If every single Canadian ceased to exist, then Canada wouldn't exist either, right? Canada's made up of Canadians. Okay, so each part's important to the whole. That being said, though, one Canadian can perish and Canada exists. Same thing with organisms. One cell can die and the organism still survives. Okay, so the functions that cells need to be able to do for themselves, they have to obtain materials, nutrients, and they have to get energy. They have to make products for growth, and that's usually in the form of proteins. They have to get rid of waste. They have to create new cells. In other words, they have to reproduce, and they have to respond to their environment. Okay? If you're thinking that sounds kind of familiar, well, those are those 5 basic functions. Okay, the 5 basic functions of being alive. The cells have to have those as well. If they can't, they're going to die. Okay. This last slide right here, you don't need to know for grade 8. It's just really interesting. So eukaryotic and prokaryotic. Prokaryotic cells, those are those ones that don't have nucleus. And prokaryotic cells are almost always unicellular, okay, meaning it's an organism made up of one cell. So here's a prokaryotic cell, and this is a unicellular organism. Okay, eukaryotic, that just means it has a nucleus. Okay, so that could be unicellular or it could be multicellular. Okay, our bodies are made up of trillions of eukaryotic cells because they have nucleus. Again, you don't need to study this. Don't think this will be on the test whatsoever. I just thought it was really interesting, and this is something you will eventually study, likely in grade 9 or grade 10 science. And if you want some more study material, you can check out this website here. Now, unfortunately, the website here, it used to have this really cool interactive cell model where you could look at organelles, click on them, it would zoom in, it would show you the organelle as well as describe its function. But this website's gone down. Okay, so at home, we can try on your Chromebook, but I'm not sure if it's going to work. We can download the Cells Alive so that it works on your computer itself. Okay, you can do that on your own time if you choose to. It's a pretty cool resource. It helps illustrate the different parts of the cells. So that's something you can work on your own if you choose to. Don't have to, but it might be a worthwhile study resource. Okay, so that is topic 3. Happy studying. Good luck.